as Elon says, we're in an intelligence explosion and that the fraction of intelligence made up by humans is rapidly diminishing.
This is the most important conversation of our time. We have already entered into the singularity, which means recursive self-improvement of AI. This is happening. We are in the middle of it, and it's by far the greatest transformation humanity has ever seen. Approaching God level is probably the most dangerous thing for humans, and that includes Elon.
Yes.
So once the top 20% not only own everything, but also can produce everything, you don't need the 80% anymore. Basically, the rich demand their fair share, and their fair share is 500% of what you get.
All right, today I have Jo Bhakdi with me, and we are going to be talking about the AGI continuum, not singularity, that is upon us. And it's kind of a strange and interesting way to think about the arrival of artificial general intelligence that is as smart as humans, if not smarter, across not just a few domains, but many, many domains. And I think we are entering into this era now where, as Elon says, we're in an intelligence explosion, and that the fraction of intelligence that is made up by humans is rapidly diminishing, and the fraction of intelligence that is made up by these artificial machines that we have created is continuing to grow at an exponential pace. And so the implications of that on all of society, our communities, our nations, whether they're faith communities or things that were organized around different interests, obviously geopolitics, all of these things are impacted in massive ways by this intelligence bomb that is exploding right now across the world, starting in the United States and then being accelerated by China. And so that's the topic that we want to dive into today. I'm really glad that Jo has graced us with his time today to dig into this, because this is something that he has thought about deeply. He has his own YouTube channel, and he is a regular guest on Herbert's if you haven't seen him there. And he also has a website called pioneerlands.net that is a place where he explores these types of ideas. And so we're going to dig in. He posted a post on X the other day that I thought was very thought-provoking. And so we're going to share that with you, and then we're going to dig in and move forward and really just start to have a conversation to explore the implications of this deep and wide-ranging technology on all of society. So thanks for being with me, Jo.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Hans. So good that we have this conversation. I believe this is the most important conversation of our time, maybe of our lifetime, but definitely the most important thing all of us have to think about right now. Because this is happening, we are in the middle of it, and it's by far the greatest transformation humanity has ever seen. And, what are the odds that we live through that time right now? And I think it dawns on more and more people every single day. I think right now it's still the 1-2% who really get it in the Western world, but by end of the year, it's going to be 5%. By end of next year, it's going to be 20%. And by end of 2027, it's going to be 100%. So it's going to be very exponential what's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so here I'm going to go ahead and bring your post up on screen, and we'll start going through it. So I'll just let you read this, since these are your words, and then we can hear your words in your voice. And then I'll interject some questions kind of as we go along.
Perfect. Let's read my post. So here in original voice, here it comes. So here comes today's red pill. I just disclaimed what the pills are, so everyone knows it. So blue, you're an NPC, non-playable character, and lost it. You just believe whatever is being told to you. If you're black-pilled, that means you understand what's going on, but you're giving up. And you think, oh, I'm out, I can't handle this. If you're white-pilled, you understand the truth, but are a bit delusional. You think, oh, everything is amazing. Abundance, ASI is going to save us. Red pill, you understand the truth, and you think like a reality engineer to get the best outcome. So you face the truth. You don't say, oh, it's a disaster, we are all going to die, or it's going to be perfect. You say, well, it's what it is. I want to understand it, and then I want to do the right thing. So, beginning of 2025, I voiced my belief that we have already entered into the singularity, which means recursive self-improvement of AI. So the computers or the AI improves itself, which then leads very quickly to artificial general intelligence or AGI, which then very quickly leads to ASI if it's recursively self-improving. And I also said that the singularity is not a point in time, but actually a continuum, because recursive self-improvement initially has humans in the loop and then step by step reduces human involvement until complete recursion is achieved. So
let's pause there for just a second on that point, because I think, maybe this is something that will go by, a number of people. But just to review what happened with AlphaGo, in the early era of these artificially intelligent systems that were developed by Google DeepMind, that, eventually I think a lot of people understand that we were able to achieve systems that were as good at the game of Go or the game of chess or, games like StarCraft, that are as good, if not significantly better than the best humans, and able to just dominate them in ways that we can never beat them, on our own. And it didn't start like that. The first systems that were trained were actually trained on a lot of human data, and so it required a lot of human effort and input to get the system to where it was pretty decent. But the whole time that was happening, there was a flywheel that was being built up that allowed then for them to abstract away the principles of how to train this artificial agent. And eventually what they were able to do is just let it start from scratch, not include any human input, and to completely explore the solution space for, how to win at this game that has, these rules and these boundaries. And it was able to discover ways to play the game that no humans had ever discovered before, and could predict, how humans would play so well, so far in advance, that it could always outmaneuver them and win. And so I think that's the, framework that this has been developed with in the past that maps onto what you're saying here, where we are building a system right now. It's much larger. It's much more capable. We're building on top of a foundation of these generative AI models that are multimodal. So I don't think calling them LLMs anymore is, a very good description. They're not just large language models. They're large generative AI models that can take information from audio, video, text, and then they can produce general actions, and they are generally intelligent across, a wide variety of domains. And so we're trying to build the type of reasoning and foresight into these general models now that we have in the past been able to put on top of these, narrow agents that could play a game just like chess. But then, if you wanted to take that AI and make it do something else, well, it would totally and completely fail, and, not even have the ability to learn how to operate, in a new domain that was outside of just the game of chess. And so I just wanted to set that context for the audience to understand that. So is there anything you wanted to riff on there, or should we go ahead and continue?
Yeah, I think the important thing is, number one, imagine you have chess or Go and you have an AI doing this and it becomes very good. They also used competitive AIs that played against each other, and then they learned very rapidly. So the whole point about recursive self-improvement is there's one area in the universe of all the possible areas you apply AI to that is of a different quality. And that one area is the AI itself, right? Because if you deploy the full power of AI for one specific objective, and that objective is to improve itself, then it gets very dangerous, because if it cracks that, then of course it becomes better in doing that, and then becomes even better, and then becomes even better. So this is the singularity, right? And what I realized, I think, beginning of this year, is that the singularity is not a point, it's a continuum, because this doesn't happen overnight and suddenly you go from all humans working on AI to only AI working on AI. It's a continuum where the humans, only do 90%, but the AI can already do 10% of the coding or 10% of the analytics or 10% of the training. And then it accelerates already because you have 10% more power in there. And then it becomes 20 and so on. And there's an exponential, path towards the actual full singularity. And I think the full singularity will take a long time. But it doesn't matter, because once you're more than 0% AI in the loop, you already are on an exponential trajectory. So that's already happening. And to continue the post, that means we are now officially in the age of AGI, where everything around us will now experience an exponential increase in intelligence, in machine intelligence. And we are not prepared because the human mind is not good in exponentials. And here we don't have just one exponential, we have the ultimate cubed exponential, whatever you call it, because this is all of society being affected at the same time with huge recursive effects on the whole system. So it's going to be very wild. For the economy, that means that from now on, things will get weird. We will see mass unemployment in 2027, starting in 2026. Early signs showing now. A lot of people will be left with nearly nothing. At the same time, the economy and GDP growth will decouple from those left behind because exponential wealth will be accumulated by capital owners. Tesla shareholders, Nvidia shareholders, Microsoft, and so on, all the AI companies. Most labor and technology will be replaced by capital. That's a reference to, very important economic formula that all economic output or GDP is produced by three input factors. You need labor, you need technology, you need capital. There's a multiplicative relationship. So that's the formula, L times T times C. But not in the future, not now anymore, because both labor and technology fall to the wayside. They are unimportant because now capital can buy them both. If you want more technology, all you need is more capital to buy more AI. If you want more labor, even easier. You have capital, you buy more labor because you buy AI inference. The beneficiary of this crazy thing are not just the 1%, because we live in a new time now, where not just the 1% richest benefit from it, but my estimation is the 20% with capital, with strong exposure to the stock market. Because these stocks will go through the roof, not just Tesla, but a lot of these, because you have massive accumulation of capital power. And I'm not saying what I want, by the way. This is one of my core paradigms that I try to hammer into everyone's mind. When I say something, it's not that I want that. We have to separate out what we want and what we analyze. And most people are not good enough at that. We need to train ourselves. If you observe and analyze,
trying to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be.
Right. And once you see it as it is, which is not easy, because it's not just what it is, you have to also explore it and understand the true theories behind it. Then you have the truth, and then you think what you want. And then the third step is you engineer the path to where you want to go. So you have to separate out these steps. One of my core theses is, and this is very important, that this massive societal and economic bifurcation between capital owners and those left behind will lead to a new type of long-term sustainable economy, which is a new thing. Because in the past, economic theory and reality was you cannot leave 80% of the population behind because it will implode your economy, because you lose the demand. That will change. And we will have a sustainable economy, not sustainable society, but a sustainable economy, which will be bad news for most, because normally a bifurcation like this would lead to economic implosion due to demand breakdown followed by a reset, some revolution or something. There will be so much productivity and economic growth at the top that this economy will be able to not just sustain itself, but grow massively, right? So once the top 20% not only own everything, but also can produce everything, you don't need the 80% anymore from an economics perspective, which is totally new. That never happened before, and creates, of course, massive potential for problems, while at the same time not creating the problem that normally stops this, which is the economy stops, not anymore. So in nominal terms, I think I have a video coming out on this next week. It's already recorded. The US economy, here's my projection. The US economy will be able to grow over 10% and maybe significantly more. We have to understand 12%, for example, is massively more than 10 because it's compounding. Annually, long term. So I think starting next year or before 2028, it is very easily conceivable that the US economy in perpetuity grows over 10%, starting very soon. And here's the funny thing I have another video on. If you think I'm crazy, note that nominally is what I said. So look up when the US economy grew over 9% the last time, and you will be very surprised. So people confuse real GDP growth, or so-called real, I don't think it's real, versus nominal, which every shareholder, for example, cares about because that's the dollars, right? Nominal just means, the GDP is 10% higher than it was the year before. That's what I'm talking about, not real. Really, you start dividing this by all kinds of stuff. So,
so I looked this up, and we'll see if the answer that the LLMs gave me is correct. But according to, I think it was Grok that I was looking at, the last time nominal GDP growth was over that 9% was actually, I think, 2021. It was like the backside of COVID.
Exactly. And the year after, it also grew over 9%. So it was 2 years in a row. And the year before COVID, under Trump, it already grew nearly 6%. So it's not just COVID. And in COVID, the economy did not shrink a lot. It shrank under 1%. So in 2000, it went from 6% to negative 0.9% to 9% and then 11% or something, 10.5%. So people forget that we are already entering that age. It was mostly inflation-based. But
Yes.
We should not forget that productivity explosion and AI explosion also drive up inflation a lot. That's what people don't understand. Because people think, we have
Asset
abundance.
inflation.
Yeah, which in the end means, much more money that's being printed. And the reason for that is you have to think like an economist. Not, most people say, the robots are going to produce all these goods. They become much cheaper, so we have deflation. Wrong. Because when do you have inflation? When people print money. What is the government going to do with 80% of everyone unemployed? They have to give them money. Where does it come from? Well, not from taxes. So you have to print money like crazy. So, the fact that the goods get cheaper doesn't help you if no one can buy them. And then you need to print money. And there's a cynical rule of thumb. For every dollar printed that goes to the people, $5 are being printed that go to the banks. Because, I don't know why. I know why, because the banks want money. So that's what you have seen in 2008 and so on. It's kind of the people who control the economy, which are rich people.
The most successful man-in-the-middle attack in all of human history.
Yes. Basically, the rich demand their fair share, and their fair share is 500% of what you get. And that's how money printing works, right? You can print money, but you have to give the rich their fair share, their 500% of each dollar. And that will continue to happen. It's not going to change. So that leads to massive asset inflation because they're not going to buy currywurst or sausages with it. They're going to buy Tesla shares in NVIDIA. So, and again, don't shoot the messenger. I'm not saying I want this. I'm saying that's what it is. So we need to deal with it. Okay, real GDP growth will become increasingly difficult to measure and become a nonsensical metric. So that goes into my truth theory. We have to take reality more and more at face value. If the economy grows at 10%, that's what it is. If someone then claims they have some real GDP that they can compute, the people who compute that, they don't even understand what they're computing. They're dividing all kinds of numbers by each other, and each of these numbers, the underlying truth of these numbers is shifting constantly. Like, what is inflation? Like, what does it all mean? How do you measure what inflation? For example, inflation does not include asset inflation. So total madness, right? It's just CPI mostly. So you have to be very cautious once you go into the rabbit hole of economic statistics, they can slap you in the face with all kinds of weird numbers that are all not really true. So, what does real even mean in real GDP when we have massive asset inflation, massive productivity growth, massive price of goods deflation, and massive unemployment? This, is dizzying for any normal economist. It's like, oh, this all doesn't match anymore. All the things that used to be correlated are now completely uncorrelated or negatively correlated. So we have to be very cautious with any derived metric because it could become completely nonsensical. So I'm a simple-minded man, right? So if you tell me 10% growth, I say, oh, do my Tesla shares go up 10% if Tesla wouldn't do anything? Yes. So, okay, fine. It's 10%. That's like nominal GDP. All of this is very good news for the top 20%, which I define as the capital owners, the people who have significant exposure to equities, for example, as well as for the pioneers. So this is a new class of humans that I defined, and pioneers are the people who understand these things. Even if they don't have much capital, they engage in this one job that is left for humans, which I call reality engineering, which basically means you look at reality like Elon, but we can do this in many other areas, in areas that I believe are more important than Elon's areas. I think Elon has a firm grip on the number 2 most important sectors of humanity, but the number 1, no one even tries, except for us, which is core civilization. Our cities, how do we live, our relationships, our communities, our media. Well, Elon is a little bit in that. And of course, capital. That's a whole complicated thing. So the pioneers can basically...
To give him his due briefly, I do think that X, the contribution of, and you've made this observation as well, the contribution of X to allowing free speech in the age of the internet is, I think that's fundamental and foundational to our ability to solve the number one problem. And I think he does realize that, that's going to take a lot more effort than he has time to make possible. Like, he wants to inspire people, do some important things to show people that big important things can be done. And then it's like, okay, now we got to figure out what are we going to do in order to preserve society.
The bottom line is I'm an Elon fan. I think Elon's very smart. I think he's not narrowly smart. I think he's smart beyond mechanical engineering. But I'm also not, he's still human and he still has normal limitations, and we need to watch out because Elon's going to be extremely powerful, and all humans, including me and you and Elon, are susceptible. As everyone, if you are following any faith or anything, every religion wants you, like vanity and, approaching God level is probably the most dangerous thing for humans, and that includes Elon. So we need to be a little, while I'm a fan and we have to, see where he really does amazing things, we also need to be a little cautious. But to your point...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me just take this to Peter Thiel for a second, because I love one of the points that he reiterates a lot of times when people ask him questions is like, he doesn't want to be too optimistic, because then that removes our need to actually do things. He doesn't want to be too pessimistic. So he doesn't want to take the white pill or the black pill in your terminology. He wants to take the red pill, look at the situation, try and really understand, okay, so many of us have a default answer to why the situation is the way that it is. And, that kind of, we just absorb it from the society and the culture around us. And then that turns our brain off from even having to think about, okay, but like, what's really going on here? And what can I do to change it? And so, yeah, I think his framing around that is an exceptional way to think about, taking the red pill. And I think we have to guard against, especially those of us who do look up to people like Elon or Palmer Luckey or Peter Thiel or, any of these people who have been able to accomplish big major things, and not just rest on our laurels and think, okay, there are important people who are very smart, who are working very hard, and they can save us.
Yeah, very important. We leave the savior thing to people who are not CEOs or any normal humans. So I think, so I think that's very important. And to your point, I actually posted something. I did a video on this too, that I believe X is the most underrated of Elon's companies, because I do think right now, so far, X has been the most impactful and most important company of all. Because without X, who knows if Trump would have won? Who knows if Europe would be in the positive trajectory it is right now? Because you need free speech, and free speech was dead. So I think it's of enormous importance what he did there. And he did it very consciously. He knew exactly what he was doing. So that's pretty laudable.
It would be impossible for those of us who care about society to actually be able to identify and then the real root cause problems and prototype real solutions to them without the ability to have free speech throughout that process.
Exactly. And so I think Elon did exactly the right thing with X, even though it was a side quest, a major side quest, and he did exactly the right thing with Trump, because, you can't walk on something and ignore the bigger thing, right? I mean, what is the point of Elon doing all these things if he ends up in jail, right? If Kamala wins and then they put him in jail or whatever. So he knows political risk is real, especially if you go down that crazy road. And so he knew he has to prevent it, and he did it. Boom. Now he's back. Now he knows, okay, now it's kind of going in slightly the right direction.
It's still a giant mess, but it's slightly less messy. We averted a bend in the knee of how messy it was getting.
Right. I mean, politics, I think for the pioneers, for me, and how I view the world, and I'm sure also for Elon, politics is not a primary objective because it's messy, dirty, chaotic, and stupid. But if it gets to the point, and it got to that point, that you end up in jail or something, then you have to intervene, because then you can't walk anymore. You can't build SpaceX from jail. So once it goes totalitarian and insane, you need to do a side quest and stop it. But to your point, I think politics cannot save us. We can just make sure it doesn't kill us faster than necessary, right? So, and I think that was the right move. So let's continue here. All of this is very good news for the top 20%, as well as for the pioneers who master reality engineering, and every savvy AI investor who's in between, who can, even with little capital, now make enormous gains if you are more aggressive than a normal investor, right? And if you understand NVIDIA better, if you understand Palantir, if you understand crypto, if you understand Tesla, of course, maybe even private investments. So knowing stuff has never paid off more than now. And not knowing, just predicting and understanding. The creation of wealth and the design of reality will be a breeze for them, for these people. Everything will become possible more or less instantaneously and very soon. But the fact that everything becomes possible doesn't mean it just happens. You still need to engineer it with the tools.
Let me pause also here for just a second to reinforce that point that, it doesn't matter how small of capital you start with right now. If you put it in the right places, that knowledge advantage is far more important at this moment in time than the size of the capital that you are deploying into these things. That, if you can allow even $1,000 to compound at a compound annual growth rate of roughly 30% over the course of 30 years, you'll still be doing phenomenally well. And it should be more than reasonable to compound at well above 30% in the economy that we are talking about here. And so what would have been doing very well can turn into doing phenomenally well, even starting with something as small as just $1,000 in the right places. And so that, I think
just, from an investment perspective, if we have nominal growth of 10 to 12% in perpetuity now, maybe more sometimes if they inflate a little bit more, that means you can easily make 50% a year continuously in CAGR, because that's the entire economy. If you aim at AI, what do you think how much these companies are going to grow? And you see it look at all of them, right? So look at Palantir, NVIDIA, and also Tesla. So, I think 50% is actually realistic at this point. Of course, most conventional investors and Wall Streeters are going to say I'm crazy, but wait and see. And if you had this bucket of shares, you're already vastly above 50% compounded.
And so for people who want to do some quick math to understand what we're talking about, if you take 72 and you divide it by 50, you're, rough, we'll just say it's, 1.5 times. So it takes 1.5 years to turn $1,000 into $2,000. And then another 1.5 years to turn $2,000 into $4,000. And so then just, get out a calculator and do
8 years
whatever.
And you're at $1 million.
Yeah, it doesn't take very long at all, very many doublings for you to ride up the exponential curve into what seems like, a nearly infinite amount of money compared to today.
And important, it's two things. It's capital and reality engineering. That's my new formula. All economic output will be capital multiplied with reality engineering. That's how good you are in engineering reality. And that's also true for you individually. We have to understand, with the current level of ChatGPT 5 and Grok, you are basically looking at a situation where for $40 a month, you can hire not just one, but basically as many tabs as you can open, like 10 doctors, 10 lawyers, 10 coders, 10 anything. And if a doctor is out there, it's like, oh, it's not doctors yet. Well, it's very clear that ChatGPT or Grok outperforms doctors on a wide range of medical missions already vastly. Only that doctors still outperform also the AI in some areas. But we have to be fair, right? If you do, all kinds of, if you basically dissect the job into all kinds of tasks, the AI already beats massively all these guys, right? And in certain dimensions. So all I'm saying is it's basically, there's this thing, if you're in California and you go to Home Depot and there are all the Mexicans standing there, like, oh, I'm doing stuff for you. And I jump into your truck and fix your whatever you want. And you pay me $10 or $20 an hour. It's like you go out and instead of that, you have basically 1 billion doctors, lawyers, coders standing there and say, for $40, you can hire me a month. And I work day and night. And so that's the new reality we have today, and that's just they become just exponentially more powerful. And then the question is, what would you do with it? Right? You can basically hire as many experts who do research, who code, who write you up legal stuff, who whatever you want on a massive scale for basically no money. And so, but what would you do with it? It's not easy to figure out what to do with it, but that's your job, besides
and
investing.
It is very hard to then wrangle that into something, like these things can go off and they can do things, but how do you get them to solve real problems in the real world for real people? Like there's a lot of infrastructure and tooling that you have to put around these things in order to constrain their output to be these things that actually help, in your terms, reality. And so I think, that's a lot of the companies right now that are poised extremely well for the future. This is one of the reasons that Palantir has been so successful, is that they offer, these big institutional companies and, and governments and all sorts of different large organizations, the ability to put those types of frameworks then around, this infinite ubiquitous intelligence, whether it's, for healthcare, for law, for, supply chain, for...
Why I'm using that labor comparison and literally think about, oh, I'm going to a Home Depot, buy a bunch of stuff, and they are lined up, and for $20 you can take them, put them in the car and say, I need this done, right? So you have to imagine it the same way. This is literally like, millions of doctors and lawyers and coders and accountants standing there. It's not the fault or the flaw of the AI that you can't make them productive. It's your problem. It's reality engineering. What would you actually do if I stuff your home full of actual accountants and doctors and lawyers? I mean, you wouldn't make money with them. It's like, oh, what do we do now? Exactly. That's what you have.
Exactly.
I mean, they're not magically creating money. You need to tell them what to do. It's like, okay, there's a super lawyer, a super doctor, a super accountant, and 10 super coders, but they're just sitting on the sofa. So what now, Hans? What's your plan? So it's literally very similar to that. You have to come up with a pretty good plan, and you can still fail. There are funded startups all over the place in Silicon Valley, funded with millions, who had great people who just failed because they couldn't figure that out. So it's basically as if a VC gives you 25 million bucks and say, do something with it. That's exactly what it is. Most people still would fail, but that's a good position to be in. So it's very bad news for everyone else, right? For the people who can't figure that out, you get your 25 million, but you have to spend it on labor and experts. If you can't figure it out, now comes the bad news. Red pill, right? We need to see reality for what it is. Virtual worlds, gaming, and a fully capital-controlled government, that's a whole different story, will likely be able to prevent political revolution in America and the West by distracting young males, who are the key population, in the bottom 80%, the only ones who can create real problems, with virtual drugs and provide them with just enough not to starve. So that's very dystopian, but I'm saying it's easy to handle. It's kind of easy to handle that problem. So, that's a bad situation to be in if you don't become a pioneer.
Can we look at this divide between the 20% and the 80% just briefly? As far as, one of the things about our structure right now for capital is that, so many sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and retirement accounts, there are a lot of people who are participating in capital kind of passively through just the structures that are already set up. And so if, someone is coming from existing jobs, will it really be, 20% versus 80%, or will it be more like 30 or 40 or 50% that ends up getting to kind of ride that capital wave because of the semi-socialized nature of capital allocation in current society?
Well, the answer is very simple. The answer is just math, right? You have to look at the capital structure and you have to determine the exposure of everyone in any country to AI-centric equities, because that's the driver of all future wealth. And if you do that, you see great inequality between countries, independent of their wealth. For example, most Scandinavians are not great at that. Germany is horrible at that. They have a lot of money, but they're investing it completely wrongly. In America, you have other, in America, other types of inequality that a lot of people just don't have money. That's the problem in America. So in Europe, many more people have money than in America on a distribution level, but then they invest it horribly wrong. So in Germany, of the total population, the amount of smart investors is massively smaller as an absolute percentage than in America. But the people with exposure to equities in Germany indirectly is higher because people have more money in average. So what does it all mean? I think, of course, the American capital owners tend to be the biggest winners all the time, plus a tiny sliver of the Europeans who are in pioneer lands, for example, who understand that and who invest their money smart. The Europeans, in theory, are in the best position as a population because they have best wealth distribution. But the Americans who have money, which is 20-30% of Americans who have significant assets, they are in a better position from a mental framework perspective because we don't need to educate Americans that they should make a lot of money. Whereas Europeans are like, oh, I put it into my savings account. So that will be the biggest driver of future inequality between the capital owners. So the people who don't have capital, I mean, that is, I think that's America's biggest problem, that you have an enormous capital ownership underclass of probably 60% or something that literally have nothing. Like 50% have definitely nothing. And the next 10% don't have any significant exposure. So you're dealing with, and then the next 20% don't have that much. And then 20% of Americans are just loaded. I learned this like again and again that, of course I don't think that. I think, I just have 5 million in stocks. I'm poor, but you're not that poor if you have 5 million stocks. So, so I think that's going to be very interesting. And to your point, I mean, these whole pension funds, I think they're all like partially a fraud because they accumulate all the money. They make stupid investments. They're all managed by BlackRock. Then BlackRock charges them the fees and the other guys. And then they do the aggressive things with the fees. They do actually aggressive things with the capital, but the pension funds only marginally benefit from that. So this will be allocation of capital will be very important, much more important than it is now. You can't just diversify.
Let me make one additional point that I think for Americans will be very powerful over the long term, but I think we've got a huge gap of, 40 years of millennials and young Zoomers that were born before we instituted these, Invest America accounts that are now called the Trump accounts. That those $1,000 investments.
Them now, so it's like or in the future, I don't even know. I think 2026. So not many people before 2030 will benefit from that.
Exactly. But those accounts, I think, are, at least they're a move in the right direction, that even just participating in the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 in the United States stock market moving forward will put people in a much, 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 much better position than doing, nothing. And I think that would land you close to that 20% mark that you've put here. That, if you're looking globally,
and I think it's
who gets to participate.
I'm working on some research, but I don't want to talk about it yet because I'm not sure. I'm not done yet. But I think in this whole projections, right, in the whole predictions I make about the future, I have certain assumptions. For example, fully capital controlled government and things like that. And because governments are too slow and too dumb, and they will be completely, completely over, ruled by Tesla, Elon, Sam Altman, Microsoft. Like, they will absolutely dismantle these governments, in my opinion. But the interesting thing is, and I'm critical of many aspects of America. I think a lot of things are actually pretty bad and underdeveloped in America. But other things are tremendously strong, where America is like so far ahead of the rest of the world. And if there's one government that is always, you never know what's happening next, it's the American government. So the others, I don't buy it, right? Maybe some Scandinavians do something, they just don't talk about it. So they surprise sometimes on the upside that they did something smart, but no one knows of it. But the American government is smart. This one, right? They're tapped into the best of the best in America now, thanks to Elon and Trump that he won. And I think they might surprise with some stuff, right? That probably makes it possible that the American government won't be completely knocked out. But it's going to be a hybrid, right? So there's no doubt that the capital owners will have enormous control over the government. But I think I see more and more a scenario where the government retains some control in America, because it does smart things and it understands all the things I'm talking about, which is probably the only government that truly understands that. And with government, of course, most people in the American government are totally dumb. But the difference is some of the people are insanely smart. That makes it special. Like David Sachs, Elon Musk, Chamath, Mark Andreessen. These are actually the elite, the intellectual elite of the country, have a direct influence now, and Peter Thiel, into the government. And that could be the saving grace of the American government. Because if that wouldn't happen, if you had Kamala, it would be the end, because the next 4 years will be the most transformative years ever and the most transformative redistribution of power globally. And the power goes all into the AI companies.
Well, and even apart from, whether or not they're able to create policy that is actually beneficial, if they'll just do the one thing of deregulating and getting government out of the way of smart reality engineers, just that one thing, I think, is going to have the most positive impact the government could have.
I agree with you, especially in Europe, that urgently needs to be guaranteed, and it's not guaranteed. But it won't be enough. You also need to this is a precondition to succeed, but you need a strong government, because if the government is gone, you have a problem. Like, people don't understand what that means, right? If the government is gone and Sam Altman is sitting there, it's like, you know what? I own the military, I own the police. It's not the greatest situation. And nothing against Sam, but you know what I mean. And so maintaining some form of government is useful. And you can only maintain government if you have power. And where does the power of the government come from? From money. But if all the money is not in the government anymore, it's toast. So the question will be, how does the government secure its access to power in a world where these companies like Tesla or Palantir or Nvidia can suck up trillions and trillions in free cash flow. So it's going to be very interesting. You can't just tax them. You need other things. So this is all more extreme than people think. If you draw out I do it with Tesla a lot, but I mean, it's not that different for the other AI companies. And so it's going to be very interesting. So let's continue here. Now we go into the pioneer land. I have a special thesis here. The societies that are likely to be least dystopian are those who have the highest social and human development. And now I get to my special take. Because I did a lot of research on the ground, actually. I've traveled all across America, but also in Europe. I was now, over the last few months, I really did my research here, not just in theory, but in reality. And I think the societies where you just walk through that society and talk to people that just have the highest human development is still Scandinavia. Maybe Luxembourg and Switzerland, these small, tightly self-governed countries. Maybe some small Eastern European or Baltic countries. And they have the huge advantage that people still have high trust. And I know, on the political spectrum, I view myself as a centrist, but of course I would be called a right-winger like everyone. So if you go on right-wing X, everyone's like, oh, Denmark, Sweden, they're all like toast, they're overrun by migrants, everyone gets murdered and raped. And it's like, bro, it's like, I get it. You have to read the news and there are bad things. And in Finland, there was just this rape or murder case where they just left the migrant out again. So there are bad things. But you also have to take the red pill and actually travel there. It's like, okay, fine. When you're in Stockholm or something, it's just different. It's not that unsafe and everyone is extremely civilized and nice. So, we have to get all the data points together. So the advantage of these is for societies to survive what's coming. The most important thing is the ability to take a step back and talk to your fellow citizens and say, okay, what do we do next? And if you can't do that, and in the US, you can't do that, right? If you walk on the street and ask your fellow citizen, they don't even speak your language. So it's bad news. So these small and more tight-knit and high IQ societies, high average IQ, where you can still make decisions together, have by far the best position because you will need to make decisions together. Social cohesion, homogeneity, and a strong sense of social responsibility and mutual affinity, right? If you hate everyone, not good. It's better to live with people you like. And of course, all the right-wingers always say, well, but that's exactly the problem. Look at Sweden. It's like, well, you should travel to Sweden and actually look at it. Of course, they did very stupid things and undermined all these things. But the net outcome is they're still extremely better off. They did stupid things and they're worse off than before, but objectively, they're still much better off. So, we need to be rational about it. This will be very important. And of course, now comes my next most important thing for our friends in Germany, in the UK, in Australia, and of course in the United States and Canada. So what does everyone else do?
Pause just for a second before we move on to those other societies. So if this is, I agree that there's a lot of potential value and possibility within these high trust societies, but do you see trends or mechanisms in place for them to be able to participate in that, the massive upside that is coming to then have, because, if they have all of the cultural elements in place, but they don't participate in the AI fueled growth that will provide them with the capital, are they still going to get left behind? How are you thinking about that?
It's like, I think what's very important, I love this discussion, by the way, Hans. This is like what people should actually discuss. I never hear anyone talking about these things. I have to admit, I'm a big Scandinavia fan, but not randomly, right? I'm always critical. But when I talk to the Scandies, all of the different ones, they have all different shades of it, but it's very similar. The one amazing thing that always blows my mind in Scandinavia is very different from Germany and very different from the United States, is that everyone is kind of smart and ultimately common sense. Like no one goes down a rabbit hole. They're always like having their opinions, but when it comes down to it, they're, okay, fine, let's think about this. And then they just do the right thing. I think the most stunning of them are the Finns, the Finnish people. They're just so no nonsense. They was like, Then they say 2 words to each other, and then they do the right thing. I don't know how they do it. And they do it slow. It's like, I'm not sure I understand. And then they do exactly the right thing. So maybe it's the snow. You can't afford to be wrong. They're always slow. That's my favorite Finnish paradigm. They're always slow and first. They are the slowest of them all, and then always are first through the goal because they're like, we should really not make a mistake. And so it's totally different from the Germans who are always like, this needs to happen. And then they do it all the way wrong to the very bad end. And that's so, even though they are maybe genetically similar and they have similar traits, but the culture is kind of different. And so that's my big, even if they would be on the wrong path now, for them, it's very easy to course correct once it becomes clear. And
so it's just a vibes thing for you, that you think that culturally that they will end up doing the right thing when it comes to capital because you see a pattern of correct decisions in lots of other areas.
Yes. Of course, they're all skew conservative in their behavior, also because of the snow. They're not going to say, Hans said that, let's just change everything. But they're going to say, interesting, let's not do that, but think about it. And then it's like, maybe it's time that we do something. So I think that's the superpower of the Scandinavians, that they're just not going to fail. That's like the vibe you get. They're just not into failure because it's too dangerous. And then also, look, who's the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world and who has the most exposure as a people? It's the Norwegians. Why were they invited to Trump right early on? Because they have $1.9 trillion in their sovereign wealth fund, and they have massive Tesla exposure, all kinds of stuff. So that's just the Norwegians. And I know from Pioneer Lands, the Scandinavians, even though they are super not many people, they are overrepresented in Pioneer Lands. It's mostly Americans, but Scandinavia has a much higher percentage than is a part of the population. So, I think that I'm a big fan of these areas, and I think they're also the best to prototype what we want to build. If you want to build these new societies, now let's get to the big ones, which is like the United States, Canada, Germany, the UK. What do these countries do that are a little bit screwed in different ways, right? So I think the UK, I don't have to elaborate on that. Everyone knows what's going on there. I think Australia, I haven't been there, but I see it. I think they are in similar situations. Canada is also completely screwed, probably the most screwed of all, because they combine all the bad things. Germany is also screwed in its own way. And the United States is a very interesting case because they have some major disadvantages, the Americans. They are too large. The deep state and all these problems.
Figuratively and literally.
Yeah. And I'm just talking figuratively. So America has the problem that the level of deep, systemic, and complete corruption is very extreme because you know what's going on. And the level of degeneracy of the entire system is very high, right? In terms of who sits in these, like DEI and wokeness have like wreaked havoc over the last 15 years, right? You have extreme levels of incompetence, and look at California. But America also has some great strengths, right? So America is very agile, has very, very hyper intelligent people in key positions of power, and has this pioneering spirit, in everyone. Everyone's like, oh yeah, let's figure out what to do. And so America is like a very mixed bag, but extremely risky too, right? You can clearly see how this can go completely wrong in America. Not as easily as in Canada, but so America for me it's also a very large country in terms of you have a lot of space. And so my theory is a little bit, you prototype this in Scandinavia, create perfect little designs of new cities and communities. But I think America is definitely the place to scale it the most and fastest because you have very high adoption of that. I think a lot of Americans, not as a percentage, but in absolute terms, understand a lot of things, are very open-minded and want to find solutions. And So that makes it very interesting, because I think if you're not in one of these tiny, well-run, high-trust societies, the risks are very significant, right? Because if this goes wrong and you have mass unemployment, the government starts doing stupid things and prints money, and then there's revolution going on, and then they crack down on free speech. Because all of that is better protected in the US, but I mean, good luck if you're in California, right? So I think in these larger countries, what the key will be is you need to find your tribe, right? You need to now figure out who, because there are two types of bad people you have to avoid. Bad people, there are lots of bad people who just want your money or who would be willing to do bad things. And dumb people who will be very dangerous, and dumb in the sense of they're not willing to open up their minds to new realities. They can be very detrimental when things become difficult, right? So it's important.
The Sam Altmans and the Steve Bannons.
I'm not naming any name, but but I think it has never been more important to find your people. And if you find your people, America still has enormous upsides and opportunities, because you can do great things, right? I mean, if you go in the middle, you go to Texas, you go to Idaho, whatever, and you can build things very easily. But you just have to know what you build and with whom. And so that's a little bit my theory. Even in Germany, you have East Germany, there's still a lot of space. Like, you can do things. I mean, Germany gets a little more dangerous, I think, than the US, because it's much more controlled. But Canada, Australia. So I think that's the paradigm. Either you are in one of the safer countries, safe in the sense of high human development, that are much more unlikely to really do bad things to you and your family, and who are much more likely to actually do the right thing as a country, which is inconceivable for Americans or Germans or Brits. That how could the government do the right thing under stress? But it's possible in these countries, and they are less likely to violate your human dignity and rights. And of course, Americans always say, "Oh, we have the Second Amendment and the First Amendment." Like, dudes, you were this close to electing Kamala Harris, and you already had Biden. So good luck with that theory. And everyone knows it. I mean, it's not that Americans are not aware that these things are under threat if you have the wrong constellation. So that's kind of my takeaway. So what I'm saying here is the safest way in at-risk countries, that's how I call all of our countries, including USA, Canada, Germany, UK, and France. I don't even know how to say France, but is to do this fast and achieve a critical mass of culture, capital, and cohesion that allows us to have a voice in the totally capital-controlled future governments. And capital control, it could be controlled by all kinds of special interests. And, here, before that I said, for everyone else, it will be about quickly finding your tribe and network of pioneers who are open to reality engineering and these things, and learning continuously and thinking in first principles, to form your own governance structures. We do this in pioneer lands. Focus on maximum capital growth, so maximum capital allocation is important, and master reality engineering. Then fight like hell against government overreach for free speech, true freedom of association, and the right to build your own private communities, because that's the kill shots of the bad guys, right? If they prevent this, then of course you can't do it. That's it for today. That's how I wrapped it up.
Yep. So I wanted to double click into the importance of, like you said, prototyping these systems and hopefully finding something that works, but then also the importance of scaling it. And I would like, for all of the problems that we have in the United States, I think the United States is the one place that it almost has to scale if this is going to be something that over the long term can be globally inclusive in some form or fashion. Because, if I were to move to Switzerland or to Finland or to Sweden or to Norway or any of these places that are these high trust societies, I could participate there and I could, maybe enjoy some of the insulation that's there. But the one thing that at least my understanding, not having been there, is that, I'm never going to become Swiss or Finnish or Swedish or Norwegian. Like, that, that it's not possible for me to become those things the way that if you are from Sweden, you could come to the United States and you can become an American.
Yeah, let's say it's tougher, and it's also it's definitely, you could do it, Hans, but it's not a model for humanity. Like, what's the plan? Like, transport everyone to like Stockholm? That doesn't work, right? So you're totally right. We need to do this. So I think my red pill moment, both the bad and the good, is the bad is like, I don't know, or I'm sure you can't transform the majority of humanity into pioneers. It's just not realistic, not in the next 10 years, but you have to. So I don't know what that means. It's probably bad for a lot of people, but I can't change this right now. But what we can do is we can create the prototype of the future. And I'm talking mostly about cities and community, like the actual real deal. Like, how would we even live and what are the cultural things? And then, as you know, I'm also a great critique of globalism and multiculturalism, all these things. I think it's stupid, the whole idea. It's not just stupid, it's a violation of the red pill truth. It's just not how it works, right? People don't like that. They like people who are like them. And that's true for all people, right? That's also why it's not racist. It's true for everyone, right? It's like the Japanese don't like all kinds of weird people there, and the Indians also don't like it. Like, in the end, no one likes it. Everyone wants to be with their own people ultimately, and then visit the other people and enjoy them. But it's, when it comes down to living, everyone is the same in a way. And so we need a solution that allows that. And I think the fundamental principles we are discussing here are true for all humans. But that doesn't mean you need to mix them all up, because then they all, go crazy. So basically, wherever you are, you find the people you really like. And there might be an Indian or like a Nigerian who's fundamentally a little mutated, which happens all the time, who is more Swedish than Nigerian. This happens. It's just not the majority by definition. It's like one dude. And then he should move to Sweden because he fits in better. But you know what I mean? It's like a distribution. It's just not that likely. You're most likely to be like the people who are like you. So that's how it works. And, then everyone should start. That's why I call it pioneer lands, by the way. There's an S in the end, because I believe the future will be a patchwork of all these little lands that are, from a philosophical perspective, the same, but not culturally the same. They can have their own culture and their own people, but they all embrace the idea of reality engineering, because that is not negotiable. If you don't do that, you will have a problem. And so that's why I mean with exporting this. If you prototype this in Sweden, for example, you're not exporting Swedish culture. You're exporting the things you figured out. How do people live together and do reality engineering? How do they build this new economy? How do they do capital deployment and all the self-governance topics? And then you export to America, for example, and then it's getting slightly adapted, but it can take over these things, evolves further, and then you can export to Nigeria, and they do it too. So that's, I think, the future that works. And then all of these pioneer lands, of course, they are more similar to each other on an abstract level than the rest. And that's why it's pioneer lands. They can then have like foreign relations with the other pioneer lands, have a nice little federation. Everyone is happy, can visit each other, stays in their little pioneer lands, and they prosper. That's it. And they're like islands on Earth. And I mean, there's clearly a dystopian component to this. That's not my fault. I didn't invent this. That's going to happen. I think there will be major problems, like on Earth. And so the job of pioneer lands is create little islands of ingenuity and pioneership, whatever you call this, where people do the right thing. And then hopefully it spreads, or definitely will spread. Then more and more people will understand, we should do it like that. Because the people who are not pioneers right now and who you cannot just convince, more and more of them are going to get convinced if they see it's just better. That's like how you convince people.
Yep.
That's my master plan. It's getting a little far here, but this is, if I just, always try to predict and extrapolate and then come up with solutions that sit on the right logical trajectories.
One of the mental models that I use for, things that can work is something that I kind of extracted from a field called interpersonal neurobiology that talks about integration as the North Star of mental health, but I think this kind of abstracts to just complex systems. And they talk about the fact that there are really two different failure modes in a complex system that lead to it being, non-functional. One of them is the failure mode of complete chaos, and then the other one is the failure mode of complete rigidity. And so there's you can get a mental picture of this if you were to come into a room and you were to say, okay, everyone here, let's get up on stage. We're all going to sing together and just sing whatever you want in whatever key you want. Go for it. And then cacophony breaks out. That's complete chaos. And then the other one is, okay, we're all going to sing this note. Dude. And then everyone says that neither of those two things are, functional complex systems. They have collapsed into failure. But then if you were to have everyone sing a song that everyone knows, and then everyone knows their part, this is the kind of the North Star of integration is what they call it. So the chaos, that's the failure mode of everything is just too differentiated. Everything is different. And then on the, everyone's singing the same note, that's a failure mode of linkage. So rigidity and everything is too linked, too tightly controlled. And then the middle ground in between those is the possibility for integration where things are linked together in a harmonious way, but they are all their own individual separate parts that have the space and the possibility to be separate parts. If you think about a song that everyone knows where you've got 3-part harmonies going on and, people singing in the different, tenor and bass and all of your different parts.
I think you're totally right, Hans, and you can see it with successful super organizations like SpaceX, for example. There's all these people and they can work towards one direction, highly coordinated. But if something is weird, they can just pivot. They say well, now that engine failed. That's stupid. We need to change. And so it's this oscillation between highly coordinated, centralized super speed, but then saying, wait a moment, we have to change direction. And that's the magic, right? Because you have to. So I would say you're not in the middle. You have to oscillate, kind of. You have to
yes.
we are all going in. It's
and you have to have a good mechanism to not allow the pendulum to swing too far all the way into the failure mode of the one and then to move back towards the other, and so that you can stay in that place.
Right. You're as an organization, you're just oscillating between being fascist and hippies, right? You're going all in, everyone, one goal, one leader, and we get it all done. And then you say, let's chill out and smoke some weed and and take some shrooms and say, oh, maybe everything we do is wrong. And then you need to do both. Don't take drugs, kids, but you know what I mean? That's it's also Burning Man and Elon, it's Silicon Valley is good at that stuff, right? Being very militant and organized, but then at the same time, totally disrupting yourself and say, well, let's just throw it all out again. But you can't do it at the same time. And you can't just sit in the middle and do neither one. You have to kind of do both in different points in time, in my opinion.
Yes. Yep.
But to your point, I want to make one strategically important point. If I had one learning too late, but now is, I think you're totally right. And this is one of the first principles, very important. But there's one meta first principle on a different sphere, above it. That's the most important of all. That's what I figured out. On a societal, civilizational, and pioneer level, you need to find the people you like. Because whatever, and that's what I like about the Scandis, but everyone has to figure it out. You need to be surrounded by people you actually like and you actually care for and who also care for you. Because if that's the case, that's your one superpower. Because in the end, you can't go it alone. You need people you like. And I'm not talking about your family. I'm talking about way more people. You need way more people than just your family to make it happen. And that is for me the best litmus test, right? If you think, oh, maybe I like Brazil, or maybe I like Nigeria, or maybe I like Mumbai, well, then travel there and figure it out. Like, what's the place on earth? Or maybe it's a church. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't need to be a nation. It can be something, right? But on a visceral level, where do you walk across the street or across the room and think, I kind of like everyone? Like, if I had to sacrifice something serious, I would be willing to sacrifice for these people. And you have to be also very honest. If you say, no, I hate actually all these people. Like, I don't hate them, but I rather would be not here. That's a bad sign.
I would never sacrifice a dime for these people.
Exactly. I have no, yes, exactly. So, and you need to be very honest with you, because that's your true superpower. If you find these people, it will pay off. Because whatever technical insight and first principle, like the one you mentioned, organizational theories and these things, the most important thing is, why do you do all these things? And humans are very important. That's your core source of power, personal power, that you care for people. And that's not a given. You can't just sit there like a Californian and say, I love everyone, and then actually you hate everyone, like the Angelitos. Like, you can't do it the Venice Beach way. It needs to be sincere, and you need to actually feel it. And you have to be honest with yourself if you don't. And it's your job to find these people. That's extremely important. And I think everyone has these people, right? If everyone would do that, it would take care of itself. No one is left behind. Everyone would find their people. That's also why I am extremely opposed to diversity and inclusion, all these things, because they do the exact opposite. They create faceless, emotionless, and relationshipless societies that are willing to murder everyone. And that's very bad on deeper level. You need to do the exact opposite and allow exclusion in the way that people should find, everyone should have the right to find the people they truly care for. And then everyone is taken care of if you do that. And then you have a stable thing. And then you can go to the other people you don't care that much for on vacation, because they might enrich you by learning something completely different. But that's being a tourist.
And I think this is where missions really come into play. And this is one of the things that works so well about startups or, Elon's companies, these types of things that, they put out these big missions. It's like, if you're attracted to that mission, you're probably also going to like the other people that are attracted to that mission and are willing to not just be attracted to it, but willing to sacrifice for it. And so, if there are organizations or communities that are pursuing a mission that is inspiring to you, then that's one of the, richest places that you could find that community where you'll be able
it's
to...
already a super filter, right? Who cares about SpaceX? Like, who cares about space exploration in an organization that is streamlined on merit, where you have to work a lot and sacrifice a lot? This is already a giant filter. So whoever ends up there is likely going to like each other because they're unusual people.
Yeah, even if maybe you don't get along personality-wise at first, like, you can learn to have deep respect for people who are doing meaningful things to contribute to something that you care about over the long term. That's, an incredibly, I think, maturing experience for a lot of people.
Yes, for sure. And I think but that's also what I mean, by the way, with human development and civilizational development. It's all these details and intricacies of how people live together and what their culture and their, modus operandi is, that is totally not well understood and not well described, not discussed, right? The importance, for example, of having respect for people, of having respect for their individual choices. We have to make collective decisions, and to some extent we have to adhere to them. But if someone doesn't want to do it, what do we do? Like the Germans, like, oh, jail. Like in Sweden, it's like, well, let's ask the person, what is your problem? Like, how can we convince you? Or maybe we forgot something. It's a very different way of dealing with people. Or in the UK, you go to jail for even thinking about if you don't like it. So this is extremely toxic because it creates deep resentment that you cannot easily reverse. And the US is, as always, like a mix of all kinds of things, right? In the US, a lot of bad things happen and a lot of good things. But I'm saying we need to learn as self-governed people who also then have governments, whatever you call a government, but we need to develop that respect, because in pioneer lands, the individual is very important. And voluntary agreement is extremely important. And forcing people is always very bad. That backfires eventually. And so in a company, so that's why companies, it's a good example to learn some things, but it's a bad example for other things because it's a company. They pay you money, even SpaceX and shares. It's not the same as your community and your city and your family and whatever, because, so we need to learn to do that again. That's my last message. I think we also have to understand, that's why I love what we do in Pioneer Lands, that you need to self-govern yourself. You cannot outsource that to the government. It's a huge mistake. You need to confront yourself and your community. It's like, no, we need to make these decisions. We need to be accountable, and we need to seize control of our lives. Not say, I don't know, I'm not the city. Let the city council decide that. That's a bad idea.
100%. And yeah, your point is extremely important that, the things, there are things to take away from Tesla and SpaceX and these companies that are inspiring and, potentially useful, but you can't run a community, an actual community where you have a city can't be SpaceX. And SpaceX, they'll have Boca Chica, Starbase, but that's not going to be,
Snailbrook is but Snailbrook is also not that impressive. So
yeah,
we need to work on that.
So why don't you go ahead and extend an invitation to people who, they've heard you talk about Pioneer Lands here. Be a little bit more specific. What is it? How can people get involved if they're interested in it? What is the opportunity that's on offer for them there?
So it's all work in progress, of course. It's Pioneer Lands. It will always be work in progress. But go to pioneerlands.net and just sign up. It's free. We have like 2 levels. We have a free level, and then we have the citizen level for $9 a month. And the citizens they are more engaged, and they get also on the capital side, they get the financial models of Tesla and things like that I'm doing. But what we do in Pioneer Lands is we basically think through what exactly needs to happen here. We need to make sure we make money and we understand investment opportunities in AGI. That's like bread and butter. But then we also think about media and culture. Like how do we consume media? How do we produce media to actually have intelligent input that makes us better pioneers so we can understand better what's going on? And then we are working on the next layer where we develop, it's going to launch in September probably in the first version, so now, the Pioneer operating system, which is like a platform that gives you different apps, for example, capital management and your portfolio management, where you can exchange also data and information, projections of shares with other pioneers, but also a media app where we just consolidate all the different things we have into a singular stream with the objective to ultimately replace all the dumb news so you get good news. It's going to be a while, but everyone, people can help with that. Then we have the Pioneer Academy, where I'm basically working on the basic coursework of what is going on. Like there's the Academy of General Reality, my favorite, where you just outline what's even going on, because sometimes we forget, we lose it. And then there's the Capital Academy, the Academy of Life, where it's about how do you build your life in the age of AGI. There's the Academy of the State, where we try to figure out how we build the pioneer state. And this is all experimental, but it's going very well, and people are very engaged. It starts all with Tesla and investing, but people are really interested in these societal questions, also politics, of course, right? Because if you live in the UK, and suddenly we don't hear from our pioneers in the UK anymore because they're all in jail because they thought, maybe the government is bad. So that's important, and push back on that. So it's basically something where we want to build that future, but be pragmatic pioneers, because I know everyone has limited time. So while we build the future, we also make sure just on the capital investment side, everyone takes away tangible value. What is the thinking around Tesla, Nvidia, crypto? So we can make money, but then build these other things out. And then we have the network coming soon, where you see all the cities and the pioneers in the cities. So if you're in Copenhagen or in Austin or in Seattle, you can say, there are 5 other people who are actually in Seattle. I should meet them. So that's also coming in September.
Very fun, very exciting. Well, I hope that, some people will be drawn to that as an opportunity here. And yeah, because this is like we started off, these questions, I think, are the hard questions that the world is going to have to wrestle with increasingly, and seeing this ahead of time and trying to be prepared for it and meet that challenge with responsibility and hopefully prototype solutions that at least move us in the right direction.
I think ahead of time, I mean, the insane thing here is ahead of time means we are like 18 months ahead of some insane stuff that's going to happen. So it's not a decade from now. I think we're in the middle of some crazy stuff. And I think exponentially more people will agree with that statement in 6 months. That's how fast this goes. So it's time to really think and start doing stuff. And when I look at YouTube and X, I really feel this is one little theory I have, because I like Elon, I like Jensen Huang and all these guys. I think basically the smartest people on earth and the best pioneers right now, they're basically occupying 50% of the opportunity. And they do this very well. And 50% of the giant opportunity ahead is what I call mechanical engineering, AI, and energy, right? The physical world revolution. But the other 50%, or even more, the biggest opportunity of all is completely ignored. And the biggest opportunity of all is to rebuild civilization at the core. And the core is, how do we live together? In economic terms, it's real estate, it's cities, it's healthcare, it's education, it's culture, it's media. No one even thinks about that. Not in new terms. Not in the same way Elon rethinks satellites and rockets and energy and cars. No one rethinks, what are we even doing here? Why do we live in these stupid little houses and have no friends, no real friends, and no pioneers, and run into a stupid office and do the wrong job? This can all be fixed now. And the return that we get from fixing that is vastly larger than humanoid robots, vastly larger than space. Because it's just, from an economic theory perspective, that's the centerpiece of human value. Like, where do you think the value comes from? What is the emotional priority list of humans? It's health, community, and living and family. That's where we want to spend all the money we have on, because that's the most valuable thing. And so we need more Elons in that space. And I hope we breed the Elons in pioneer lands, because that's enormous opportunities, and it's much more personal, and it's economically vast. Like, think about the verticals. Mm-hmm. Real estate is the biggest vertical of all. That's basically the rebuilding the stuff. Healthcare, don't get me started on that stuff. That's also not small.
Yeah, that's a deep rabbit hole.
And then media and education, that's maybe not as big as healthcare and real estate, but it's also huge, and it's the center of the human brain. I mean, that's what we upload into our brain, media, education. So that's kind of the tire of pioneer lands. And then you have 100% of the universe. Half of the universe is Elon world, Jensen Huang world, and the other half is civilization world. And that's kind of what pioneer lands really wants to focus on that half.
I'm trying to decide if I want to ask a question that, well, I'll ask you this. How much time do you have left? Because I
have some left.
There's a rabbit hole we could go down. One of the questions in my mind as we look at all this is that obviously providing more people in more places with the opportunity to take advantage of these tools and use them to better their own lives. Like that, there's going to be an economic forcing function for these reality engineers to lower the bar, to be more inclusive of people, to use products and services that they can express themselves. And, one of the things that I think about in this new economy is just, remembering the fundamental principle that Thomas Sowell articulates in, his book, Basic Economics, that the domain of economics is the allocation of scarce goods that have alternative uses, and moving towards this world where, as long as we don't blow up all of civilization and have some sort of totalitarian AI, like the types of things that will continue to be scarce, like there's going to be real estate, obviously, That's going to be scarce. But goods and services, not so much. Human attention, human connection, authentic human connection, that will continue to be scarce. And then social status will continue to be scarce. So like one of the things that I foresee in this new economy is just a Cambrian explosion of new sports, new domains for humans to play games and compete against one another. Kind of like we've already seen with chess, how chess is seeing this huge resurgence now. People have the combination of time and of just like the possibility space of chess has been opened up because AI has continued to show us new ways to play the game. And so people can now get better than ever before, and they can hone their skills with new tools that make it more accessible as well. And so like, I kind of foresee that being one area of expansion and an opportunity for people who you don't necessarily, I mean, it is labor, like it takes you labor to invest in that in order to participate in these competitive realms. But it is a labor that is going to be uniquely only open to humans. It's not going to be, like, yes, there will be the chess master AI that will be better at that than you, but that doesn't mean that you can't put in labor and then participate in this artificial scarcity game that we create and get actual economic value and benefit back out of it.
So I think what's so cool about this time we live in is it's so disruptive that we actually have to become a little better at, I know it's a terrible word, but better at philosophy. It's a terrible word because normally it's abused with dumb stuff that's boring and wrong. But philosophy at its core is just precise thinking in first principles, right? And we need to really philosophically rethink economics, what it actually means. And at the core of all economics stands the principle of value, right? And that's what people really have to understand. Like, what does it mean to have economic output? It means to produce more value than before. You have a reality 1, and economic growth technically means in reality 2 in the future, the total value output is higher. So we need to understand what that means. What is value? And value ultimately is human satisfaction. Like the fact that a good is scarce, what does it mean? I want more of it. It gives me more satisfaction than I can afford. So that makes it scarce. And so where does human satisfaction come from? And in economics, you have these value chains, right? You have value chains. And normally pre-AGI, everyone was just a little piece in a value chain, not the endpoint. If you sell coffee, that's not a value endpoint. The value endpoint is, in the end, you don't die, you have love, and some money. Money is a value endpoint because it allows you to buy the other stuff. So there are very few endpoints. And everything else is just, I don't know, a supplier to Tesla. That's a very far down the rabbit hole, not endpoint. It's like, I give you, a wiper for the Model 3, and then they put in the Model 3 and pay them money, and then they sell the Model 3 to you, and then you drive your kids somewhere, and then you're happy. Okay, then you have an endpoint, but that was complicated. So now that the world changes in a way that we can truly engineer reality, the production of value moves up that value chain and becomes more integrated and more targeted towards endpoints. So as an entrepreneur, the difference between entrepreneurs and pioneers is the pioneers aim at the endpoints and then engineer the entire reality to hit the endpoint. So what are endpoints? Endpoints are, for example, new little cities. Why are cities endpoints? Because they encompass the entire reality of you. You're walking through the city, you're living in the little city, and these cities are not just real estate, they're designed to make you happy. You are happy, you have surrounded by the right people, your office is right where you need it, or your room where you do work. It has a Pioneer Academy, you constantly learn a little bit. You don't get sick anymore because it has preventive healthcare built in at the right point. You do exercise at the right time because the city is actually designed around your endpoint. And the endpoint is quality of life. And quality of life also means that your brain is constantly active and happy because you're constantly engineering reality. because only that makes you happy eventually, right? That you have forward movement. So these kinds of things become now possible because before you couldn't do that. It's too complicated. I can't come up with that system and then invent all the healthcare, for example, needed for that system, or all the complicated real estate plans, because it's just not possible. Now it is. I tell ChatGPT 8 or Grok 10, do this, but it needs to look like this. And, so the value that will come out of that is infinite, right? We are talking about economic value of enormous proportions. And because people are willing to pay for that, and everyone will have a lot of stuff now. But what do you spend it on? You spend it on improving your experience as a human, which entails all of the stuff. So I think the future of economics and value creation, that's why I call it reality engineering, is not, we just invent a new piece of chess or we do a Model 5. It's about systems of quality of life and forward movement. And the ultimate meta value of all, of course, is how do we build societies and civilizations ideally compressed into the little experience that we have, that do the one thing that is perpetually the right thing to do, which is doing that. It's like recursive. You want to basically have a life where you can build that better life as the core purpose of your life, because then you have the magic forward movement that ultimately create like the thing that you're constantly having a better life because you're engineering it constantly. And AI will never be able to take that job over because it's fundamentally human intent and will and imagination that is required to do that. The AI can execute it, but the AI cannot, maybe it can. This is complicated, but the humans must be in charge of determining what future they want, which is basically the core of this.
Yeah, and in order for us to be able to align around what that looks like in a meaningful way, there does have to be some sort of shared endpoint that people can pursue together. And, this is what works kind of within companies, is having that shared mission that people are moving towards. But even within societies, like I think one of the things that, even though it's very messy, has helped America to work to the extent that it has worked so far in the United States is, the American dream that you can, anyone and everyone who can legally immigrate here can have a shot to then participate in the dream, to have opportunity, to be able to make something of themselves, to be able to transform their future. And while that doesn't work for lots of people, it has also actually worked for lots of other people. And you always have those examples of seeing the people who have been able to come here and accomplish incredible things from any variety of backgrounds. And so I think that is something that has been a common endpoint that has worked, but we do need, I think, something that even transcends that. Like it can't just be a national identity thing that.
Well, I think, Hans, this is very interesting because I think the absolute genius that I still can't even comprehend of the founding fathers, specifically Jefferson, was to basically hit this wisdom vector of truth already with 100% accuracy with the Declaration of Independence. They kind of designed exactly that system I'm talking about already back then, but it was much more loose because it was like, because I already say, happiness and everything, the pursuit of happiness. So that is kind of nailing it already, and that created this country that actually does it. So the US is the only country that has that in its declaration of founding, that this is exactly the plan. But of course, now we are tightening the screws and the precision of this whole thing on a massive scale. Right now, it becomes much more tangible and much more concrete, because before, happiness just meant I'm not starving, I make some money, I'm enterprising, and I'm a pioneer in the old way, in the old West. Now it becomes much more high resolution. Now we can actually build these little societies, but obviously the society, to your point, you need a lot of consensus in the society what you actually want. And there will be deviations what that perfect endpoint actually looks like for different types of people. And we need to find the people who match each other. Otherwise, they can't even get it done because on the micro level, they just disagree.
I think that might be a good place to go ahead and wrap up for today. I'll definitely have to have you back and we can dig into this discussion in more depth because it's going to be obviously an ongoing conversation at at regular intervals. I mean, every day there's new developments in how much progress we have made down that continuum of artificial general intelligence and what the repercussions are. So I really loved having this conversation with you today. I hope that we have enriched the audience, at least in some small part, in their understanding of the world and the situation as it lies today, the responsibilities and the opportunities that are in front of us. And yeah, is there any parting words that you have for the audience?
No, I'm happy to continue this conversation. I think this is not a one-off little thing, as you can tell. It's an ongoing endeavor in Pioneer Lands, but also here in our conversation. And it's very different from other things that are happening out there because I'm not doing this to pitch you something. I came to that conclusion after being an entrepreneur, after having all kinds of experience. This is a crazy time and we need to get prepared. And then we have infinite upside. But there's also infinite downside. So that's why it's kind of a neutral assessment. There's a lot of things happening. And I believe it will be very good if we do it right. But we need to get together with the right people who understand this, who want to do something, who are pioneers, and then figure it out together and be smart and exchange ideas and engineer reality. So I can just encourage everyone to wrap their heads around it and start, figuring out what that means. Because right now, we have a little bit the luxury of time and we won't have that in 2 years, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and put Jo's links in the description of this video. If you found this interesting and you would like to follow him, he's on X at Jo Bhakdi. He's on, what is the name of your YouTube channel? Is it also Jo Bhakdi?
Also Jo Bhakdi, just add Jo Bhakdi. I have it down there. youtube.com/@JoBhakdi.
Yeah, so that will be down in the description, and we'll catch y'all next time. And looking forward to continuing to navigate this whole messy situation together.
Very good. Thank you.